Welcome to Transformative Principle, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principle. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on all the social networks at Jethro Jones. As part of our Reading is Fundamental partnership with riff.org, you can hear a bunch of different episodes about all kinds of stuff around literacy. Today, I am so excited to have David Schipper on the program. He's the director of Strategic Learning Clinic, a position he has held since 2013. He obtained a BA in English Literature in 1998 and a educational bachelor's in secondary education, English and history from McGill University in 2002. After some work as a local teacher in Montreal, David founded Tutorial Educational Center in 2007. And aside from his ability to put both parents and students at ease, David uses his clinic's fairly unique approach to help get them to the root of students' learning challenges and propose the most suitable remediation to resolve those weaknesses. As a father of two children, David knows how to relate to the concerns of parents, and as an experienced educator, thoroughly understands the struggles of his students. His passion and dedication to teaching and learning is second to none. David, welcome to Transformative Principle.
Thank you so much.
What stands out to you as valuable from our conversation today?
We spoke about what really needs to happen, the change that needs to occur in education, in elementary schools and high schools across North America. How do we overcome the resistance to change, and what elements are part of the change that needs to occur in these schools so that the children who are the future of our society are become capable with respect to their skills in work and in life for decades to come.
Yeah, very good. And the other thing that I really appreciate about our conversation is your insight into why it's a mystery why students are struggling in school, and it doesn't have to be a mystery. And you offer some ideas of how we can overcome that. So we're going to get to my interview with David Schipper here in just a moment on Transformative Principle. So, David, what would you say is the number one obstacle to helping any student to be their best?
Now, what I'm about to say is a bit controversial.
Excellent.
But it's the adults. And so before I tell you what I'm about to tell you, everyone I think has heard of this relatively new challenge that many humans face called seasonal affective disorder. And the acronym is SAD. And it's clever, as many of these are. And I have developed my own acronym using the same letters, and it is called Stubborn Adult Disorder. Now, stubborn adult disorder is very likely not going to make it into the DSM 6. It's very likely not going to make it in. But I have a rule of policy that if someone asks me a question, I have to answer it truthfully. So when you ask me what's really the number one thing in the way of any child, any student becoming the best that they can be, I will always answer the adults. The child is a child, whether they're 7 or 17 years old, but very frequently, and I know this is not what the adults want to hear, no one wants to hear that they're in the way or they're not doing a great job or there's something that they want to change or fix or there's something they could be doing differently or better. No one wants to hear that. Who wants to hear that? No one, not you, not me. But if we're really having an honest conversation about the state of education in North America today, we have to be really honest with ourselves, look ourselves in the mirror and say, we are doing a terrible job at helping students learn how to read, learn how to write, learn math, conquer math, learn about language and reading comprehension and executive function, and all of the skills that are needed to be a successful student, but a successful being in the workplace and in life. And change is hard. I understand completely. We've been doing things a certain way for decades, whether it's teaching how we teach reading, how we teach writing, the resistance to including executive function as a mandatory course that's as important as teaching English, math, or social studies. There's a huge resistance to all of these ideas. We know how to teach reading. We know how. We just got off track for a very long time. We got off track for a few decades. We were misguided. And when I say we, I don't mean me, because we've been helping students learn how to read for over
So
35 years. But in
so let me ask about that. Why did we get off track in teaching kids to read? And like, I don't want the whole history. I want the human centered response to this, because there's a lot going on, and whatever. But you said that the stubborn adult disorder is the thing getting in the way of kids being the best they can be. How did that impact us getting off of teaching kids how to read the way that we know works?
essentially, we were sold a story. We were sold a story that if students would just memorize words, all the words, then they would be able to read them when they saw them. Okay. So we were, we not you or me, but many educators, many schools across North America have essentially been sold a story for many years that if we use the three cueing system of reading, okay, we show the student a picture, let's say, some visual information, okay, the students will math reading. So in my work, I frequently meet students whose reading ability is based largely on having memorized, admittedly, thousands of sight words. But as soon as you show them a word that they've never seen before or have seldom seen, or they have to try and figure it out, they cannot read it. And I'm going to tell you a quick story. I had a meeting once with a school. The speech language pathologist, the psychologist, and the mother of the 12-year-old boy was present in addition to myself. And it was during the pandemic, so it was on an online meeting. And the psychologist said, Tim never needs to learn how to read. As Tim is my
Mm-hmm.
go-to name when I don't want to reveal the name of the actual student. Tim, and so when the psychologist said that, like in my mind, alarm bells are going off. But I said to her, "Oh, tell me more. Why do you think that?" And she said, "Well, Tim can just have the computer program read to him. The software can read to him. Or if it's an exam and we're not allowed to use that, one of our staff members can read for him instead." Now, that meeting could
Wait,
have
the school
gone one of two
psychologist said
ways.
this?
School
Okay.
psychologist said this. And so that meeting could have gone one of two ways. At the conclusion of that meeting, the mother could have easily contacted me and said, "Well, if the school psychologist doesn't think that Tim needs to learn how to read, we don't need you, David." But to her credit, as soon as it was over, she called me up and said, "David, if that woman thinks that my son never needs to learn how to read, we need to start working with you immediately." Thank goodness. But what about all of the parents? Forget about David Schipper and what I do. What are all the parents who depend on the school system to do
Yeah.
everything for their child? Teach them how to read, write, understand words, conquer math, etc. I could spend hours, and I won't, but I could spend hours telling you stories about students 17 and 19 and 21-year-olds that we meet, who we meet,
Yeah.
and they've slipped through the cracks. They've been neglected for so long. Eventually, the school just says, "Well, it just seems like you're not cut out for school. Maybe you should go into a work study
Yeah.
program
Where
or
you're
just
still
drop
going to
out."
need to read.
Right?
And so this commentary really hits home for our family, because our oldest daughter has Down syndrome. And a lot of people thought, one, she's never going to be able to read. And two, she probably doesn't need to, because she's not going to really have a job where she does need to read. And my wife and I demanded early on that girl needs to learn how to read. And in the beginning, we don't care about anything else. She needs to learn how to read. And now she's 18. She's in a super senior year of high school, and she doesn't need to learn how to read, she needs to have friends, interact, and learn how to start doing things around getting a job. She needs to know how to communicate effectively. And the IEP goals for the last several years that have been trying to get her to do certain things that she actually really doesn't need to be able to do, those things we've said, let's just stop banging our head against the wall, because we know that this is not going to come before she's 21. And we're okay with that. But we have knowledge, we have awareness, we have an understanding of what her ability is. And so we can confidently say these things we're not going to worry about, and we're going to focus on these other things that are more important and timely. But to think that you could live in our society today and not need to be able to read is just mind boggling. And it makes no sense how anybody could say that with a straight face.
I have two comments. Comment number one is, years ago, many years ago, 20 years ago or so, there was a speechwriter for President George W. Bush, Michael Gerson, who came up with the phrase the soft bigotry of low expectations, or the tyranny of low expectations. It's a patronizing and dangerous attitude that's cloaked as kindness, that assumes certain people are capable of less because of their background, whatever it is. And then the other thing that I was thinking about when you were telling your story, and bravo, okay, is that your daughter is lucky that she has two parents who are passionate advocates for her and who know how to guide, if I'm using a friendly word, the professionals to a different place than where they were. There are so many students out there who don't have that. So I'll give you just a quick example. This is the first time that this has ever happened to me, and I've been the director of Strategic Learning Clinic for the last 11 years of its 35 plus year existence. We met a young man this summer who was between ninth and 10th grade and well below grade level, like reading and language skills at the grade one level, and had never been evaluated by the school. Not at any point in the first 10 years of his education had anyone pulled him aside and said, "You seem to be struggling. Maybe we'll do a few tests to see what's wrong, what's behind this." He got marks between 20 and 30 in all of his subjects, aside from, of course, gym and art, right? All of the core subjects. And the school's response was, he just needs to try harder. So we met him, we did the consultation, we did our assessment, we found out all the information, and the mother and I attended an online meeting with the incoming vice principal of the school, again, just before the school year began last month. And the principal, the incoming vice principal, basically said, "Well, there's nothing we could do. We're not willing to write a letter for him to go to another school where he would get the help that he needs. We're really not going to be able to do very much for you." Now, unbeknownst to me, the mother was quite sick with stomach cancer during this process during the summer, and she died a few weeks ago. And it was her dying wish that her son would get the help, change schools, because they already had an idea of what school he had to go to, change schools, and get the help that he needed with us. Now, I don't have an end to the story for you because of the mother's death. It's the first time that's ever happened where we met a family and the only parent, because the father's long ago been out of the picture, the only parent died. Like there are many reasons why a family might not start working with us right away, right? They'll say things like, "Well, we're divorced and my ex-husband is paying and he doesn't agree," or "We can't really afford your services right now." There's a woman that recently said, "We can't really afford your services until middle of the school year, but you're the best." And I, like she was talking about Strategic Learning Clinic, "You're the best, and I want the best for my child. So I'm not going to waste money on traditional tutoring that's not going to have an impact. I'm going to wait until I'm ready." And I love that because the parent has said they will do whatever it takes to help their child. And this mother that just died was exactly the same way. So when I found out that she died, like it affected me deeply because I care so much. And I spoke to the young man on the phone right after she died. And I almost didn't know what to say beyond the usual platitudes. I felt so bad for this young man because it's in flux right now. I'm not sure whether we're going to be working with him or not. He, for all intents and purposes, doesn't have any parents. And so, what happens to all of these students who slip through the cracks? What becomes of them? What becomes of the teenagers and the young people in their 20s and 30s who never got a high school diploma, never got their GED, never went to trade school or vocational school? In the big bad world today, it's really hard to live alone on
For
minimum wage. And when I say really hard, I would say it's close to impossible depending on where you live,
well,
right? Like you need to live with one or two other people at least if you're
and
minimum
here's the
wage.
thing, it's hard to live on your own, but it's even more difficult to raise a family in that situation. And it's even more difficult to provide for, some security and stability for the future. And these are the implications of something as simple as, can my child read proficiently in third or fourth grade? Like, these have long ranging impacts that really do matter. And I just finished a podcast interview that's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks with Garrett Cook, and he's a principal in southeastern Missouri, and he talked about his ICU time where he's really focusing on supporting students during the day at school. And one of those big things that he's focusing on is having students turn in having students be assigned and turn in quality assignments. So it's not just like busy work, it's not just a little bit here or there. It is like really focusing on what are the things that they really need to know and understand, and how do we know it, and all that. And it's really powerful when kids are doing work that actually matters and is going to help them long term. And that's really powerful because it is a lifelong issue, and what we do as children can impact us for all throughout the rest of our lives.
So what I appreciate that a great deal, and you mentioned reading by the end of third grade or fourth grade. If it was up to me, in other words, this fantasy that David Schipper is in charge of the education system in Quebec or Canada or some other place in the United States, I would make it mandatory to test all the children by the end of grade one. Now, I'll explain. If you are a young person or an adult or an older person who has a mysterious ailment necessitating a visit to the hospital, they will do tests in order to determine exactly what the cause is of that person's ailment, okay, if it's unknown. And that's indeed what happens in hospitals around the world. Yet in the education system, it's a total mystery to the school as to why certain students struggle or not struggle. So, for example, here locally in Montreal, in one of the public school boards, there are, let's say, there's one psychologist that's shared amongst five of the elementary schools, just to give an example.
Very typical here
That
also.
person does 10 assessments in a year per school, right? So the psychologist is doing 50 assessments in a year, but only 10 students out of a school of 500. Okay. And the assessments are because the psychologist is quite busy and is only in that school 1 day a week during the school year. The assessments are bare bones assessments. So a whisk, a partial Wyatt, and maybe one of the teachers and a parent has filled out a questionnaire as well, the Connors, something similar. Okay. So it's bare bones. It gives us some information, but not all of the information that we need in order to properly help the child. But imagine if it was compulsory, okay, to for every student at the end of grade 1 to do thing. And I don't mean a short little 1 or 2 or 5 minute screening, one of these commercial screenings that schools adopt because they're cheap and easy to administer, quick to administer. I mean spending a few hours with a student, with a young child, and doing reading testing, language testing, phonological processing testing, uh, visual perceptual testing, drilling down to see, why is this child struggling? Why? Because if we know who the students are who are struggling by the end of grade 1, we can then do what we call high impact tutoring, which is a vogue term which we're going to be hearing a lot in the months and years to come. Okay, I think they borrowed it like from a similar fitness term. Okay, and so what it is essentially is we're taking students in small groups, and the same highly trained professional is going to spend at least 30 minutes twice a week with this student or small group of students in order to provide proper remedial reading instruction and whatever else they need. Right now, that's not happening in our school systems in North America. There's very little testing that's being done overall. And it's something I read somewhere that 11% of public schools in the United States, I think this was in 2022, are supporting students with
Mm-hmm.
such instruction. I mean, if we think about this, right, I'm not saying that the solutions are necessarily easy to implement. They're not. But the biggest part of the biggest challenge here is convincing the adults in the school system that this is something that has to happen if we want our children in the school system to acquire the skills that they will need to have a successful life, to avoid being incarcerated, to avoid being homeless, to have enough money to put food on your plate every day and not worry whether you're choosing between feeding your family or paying the rent or whatever else.
And David, we're talking mostly about literacy because that's what brought us together. But being able um, to assist students in multiple aspects, not just literacy and math, but also in, like you mentioned, executive functioning, and those things. It's I so I I do this coaching with people called Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Shamin and stuff. Have you heard of that at
No, I've
all?
not.
Okay. So basically, what it says is there are saboteurs in each of our brains, and these saboteurs come out and first they judge us, and then they do all these other things. They make us anxious, worry about what could go wrong. They tell us that we need to achieve more, and then we'll have value. And the reality is, we already have value because we're human beings. And tours come in, and I put my own kids through this coaching program and taught them about the saboteurs, taught them about the sage, how to overcome the saboteurs, and it made a huge difference for my kids. And it was really amazing to watch them make some changes and do things a little bit different for me personally. And these kinds of things that, you know sometimes we call learning, sometimes we call them character, all these things. Humans are complex beings, and we have more just academics that we need to develop in to have a successful life, and that is essential. And we're just scratching the surface here in our conversation today, but we definitely need to be doing more than just focusing on academics and reading and writing. We helping uh, supporting in helping their children become flourishing adult humans. Like, that's really what we need to be focused on. If we all get on the same page with that and see that that's all of our jobs, then that's going to be, I think.
I think that much of my work over the next few decades is going to be to try and convince as many school administrators and other school staff as possible of what you've just said, which is if we do things differently, if to borrow the phrase of one of the clinic's program directors, if we put the emphasis on a different syllable, we can achieve so much for our young people who are the future of our society. So much. I read recently, I forget who said this, but I agreed with it, that learning how to read and literacy in general is the number one civil rights issue of our time. And I really believe that. I believe that everyone deserves to learn how to read. And I also think that somewhere between 95 and 99% of all students can learn how to read in a relatively short period of time. I don't mean a week or a month, but a year. Okay. Depends on how good the instructor is and how often the instruction is. And if it's a program that's quite good, there are factors involved. It's a very small number of students who have severe intellectual impairments, who are severely developmentally delayed, where it will take significantly longer for that child to learn how to read. But if you think about it, that 95 to 98 or 99% of students, that's almost everyone. We can do better as a society than what we're doing right now. And it shouldn't take 30, 40, 50 years to accomplish this. It shouldn't take that long to convince the adults what many of us already know, many of us already see, that, like in my work, we're working one on one with students, like mostly outside the school system. So for us, it's ideal conditions. And we're often working with students during the school day, where the parent either has us come into the school to work with the student or arranges it, or the student leaves school a little bit early or misses first period to work with us, and so on. We make it work, and schools just simply have to make this work. But that's the effort that has to happen. How to achieve it? We already know how to achieve all of this. We know that if there is proper teacher training, if teachers who are getting their bachelor's degree in education at the university level or similar programs are taught how to teach reading, are taught how to teach writing, are taught how to teach math, they'll be more effective. That's the other major plank that's missing here, is that teachers generally don't have the knowledge to be effective with what they're being tasked to do in the classroom. And there aren't enough professional remedial reading teachers out there to pick up the pieces
Yeah.
as a result. So again, we know what to do. It's just there's a lack of will
Yeah,
right
so
now.
let's make it concrete as we close out here. What is the thing that you would tell a principal to do this week to improve literacy in their schools? They're not going to be able to go out and test everybody in the extensive way you mentioned, but what's one thing they can do right now as they're listening to this week?
So
And you got to have just one, David. You can't be like, well, here's 7 things you can do. Like,
yeah.
what's one small action they can take?
So one small action they can take, this wouldn't take very long, is simply test the phonological processing skills of the students in the classroom. Make it a game, make it fun. Okay, the first three subtests of the comprehensive test of phonological processing, you can adapt it to the classroom and see how the students do, essentially. Note who's really struggling with this. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Because it has to be, if you're going to go to a school and suggest something, it has to be something that they can implement easily and quickly, that anyone can do. You don't need special training to ask a child these simple questions, right? You can follow a script. It's these kinds of things just to get the ball rolling for the school, because it all starts with the school knowing which students are struggling. It all starts with that. If we don't know who's struggling, we don't know who we have to help. So that's my off the cuff answer to your question, without
Yeah,
giving you
well,
as
that's
detailed
good.
details.
I appreciate your clarity. Is figure out who's struggling and how they're struggling like that. If you like, if we made it even more simple, if you found one kid who was struggling in your school that you didn't know was struggling before, that would get us set on the right path for sure. So, if people want to learn more about Strategic Learning Clinic or connecting with you, how would they do that?
The easiest way is to just go onto our website, which is strategiclearning.ca. A lot of information there. Parents can have a look at our different programs, our unique approach, and just reach out to us. We work with students across North America. So we have students this year in California, and certainly many students on the East Coast and everything in between. The beauty of what we do is that we can work with anyone if we're helping with English skills or math skills.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great conversation, and I definitely encourage you to check out Strategic Learning. And thank you, Dave, for being part of Transformative Principal today.
Thank you so much.